The night Camille Okafor walked into the Harrington Club, she had exactly one goal: survive the next 3 hours without crying in a bathroom stall. That was it. That was the whole plan. Her college roommate Blythe was getting engaged, officially, with the ring and the photographer and the open bar, and Camille had promised she would be there. She had promised while sitting in her car outside a Walgreens in February, voice completely flat, telling Blythe, yes, of course, I wouldn't miss it. She had meant it then. She still meant it now, standing on the marble steps of the most expensive private event venue in downtown Boston, wearing a burgundy dress that had taken her 4 separate shopping trips to find, because nothing had fit right, nothing had looked right, nothing had made her feel like she belonged somewhere like this. She belonged. She reminded herself of that. She had worked alongside these people. She had graduated top of her class from the same school. She had the same degrees hanging on the same kind of wall. She just also happened to take up more space than most of them were comfortable with. Camille pushed through the glass door. The Harrington Club smelled like old money and fresh flowers, white peonies everywhere, arranged in tall vases that probably cost more than her monthly car payment. The ceilings were high and coffered and lit with warm amber light that made everyone look like they belonged in a painting. The guest list was exactly what she expected. Finance people, law partners, the particular strain of Boston old family that had been sending their children to the same 5 schools for 4 generations. Blythe's fiancé Theo came from that world. Blythe had grown into it. Camille had always existed on its edges, close enough to touch, far enough to feel it. She spotted Blythe across the room immediately. Gold dress, hair up, life was going exactly according to plan. Camille felt a real, uncomplicated warmth for her. Blythe had never once made her feel like a footnote. That was rarer than it should have been. She was making her way toward her when she heard the voice. I didn't know they were letting anyone in tonight. She knew that voice. She had spent 2 years trying to forget that voice. Donovan Hale stood near the bar with a glass of bourbon and the same expression he'd always had, like he was assessing the market value of everything in the room, including people, especially people. He was in a dark suit, hair the same sandy brown it had always been, jaw slightly sharper than she remembered. He looked exactly like someone who had never once lost sleep over anything he'd done. Standing next to him was a woman Camille didn't recognize, slim and blonde, and watching the exchange with mild curiosity, the way people watch something mildly interesting happen on the street. Donovan, Camille said, because there was nothing else to say. Because she refused to look caught off guard. Because she had spent enough of her life shrinking in front of this man, and she was done. You look. He paused. Let the pause do the work. Comfortable. The word landed exactly the way he intended it to, soft around the edges, settled. Like she had given up, Camille's jaw tightened. I have been, she said evenly. It's been a good year. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. I heard you left Mercer and Lane. What are you doing now? Still in finance. Consulting, she said. Which was true, which was also considerably more than he needed to know. Consulting, he nodded slowly, like this confirmed something. Good for you. It was the tone. That was the thing about Donovan. It was never what he said. It was always the tone underneath it, the particular cadence of a man who believed himself to be the ceiling in any room he entered. 2 years together, and she had learned that tone the way you learn a weather pattern. You could feel it coming before the sky changed. The blonde woman beside him laughed softly at something on her phone, oblivious. Donovan glanced at her, then back at Camille, and something shifted in his expression. You know, he said, lowering his voice just slightly. I always thought if you'd just taken better care of yourself, you could have. He made a small, vague gesture, like he was describing a renovation project, like he was talking about a property that had failed to reach its potential. Camille felt the heat rise to her face. She felt it the way she always had, not as anger, not first, but as shame, automatic and animal, before the anger could catch up. 2 years of that voice, 2 years of carefully worded suggestions. Dressing rooms where he'd waited outside and said nothing when she came out, which was somehow worse than if he'd said something. Dinners where he'd order for her, and then comment gently on her choices. The architecture of small cruelties, always constructed to look like concern. She was 31 years old. She had a master's degree in applied mathematics. She had rebuilt her entire professional life in 18 months after leaving a firm that hadn't deserved her. She was here, standing on marble floors in a dress that she had looked good in before she walked through that door, and she could feel his words undoing something in her that she had spent months carefully putting back together. "You always thought what?" she said, and her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Nothing." He smiled again. "Never mind. It's good to see you, Camille." He turned back to the bar. She stood there for exactly 3 seconds. Then she walked away, because the alternative was crying, and she had promised herself the bathroom stall thing was not going to happen tonight. She ended up near a tall window at the far edge of the room, looking out at the dark water of the harbor. The city lights reflected in broken patterns on the surface. She held her glass of sparkling water and breathed through her nose and told herself she was fine. She told herself he was nothing. She told herself she had known, walking in here, that there was a chance he would be here, because this was Theo's world and Theo knew Donovan and the math had always been possible. She had simply refused to run it. She was not fine. "You're gripping that glass like it owes you money." The voice came from just behind her and to the left. Low, unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry. She turned. The man standing there was not someone she recognized, which was notable because she had made a point of knowing, at least by reputation, most of the significant players in Boston's financial and real estate circles. He was tall, genuinely tall, not the kind of tall that came from good posture, with dark hair and the kind of face that was difficult to read at rest. Not cold, exactly. Still, like water before something moves through it. He was wearing a suit that had clearly been made for him specifically, and he held a glass of whiskey with the ease of someone who had been holding glasses of whiskey at events like this since before he was old enough to drink them. He was watching her with something that wasn't quite curiosity and wasn't quite concern. It was more like attention. The specific kind that doesn't look away. "I'm fine," she said, which was what she always said. "I know," he said. "I'm asking about the glass." She looked down. Her knuckles had in fact gone slightly white. She loosened her grip. "Long night," she said. "It's 8:47, he said. "Then it's a long 8:47. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "Augustin Varro," he said, and extended his hand. She shook it. His hand was warm. "Camille Okafor. I know who you are," he said. She looked at him directly. "How?" "I was 2 years behind you at MIT, he said. "You won the Dupree Prize for Applied Mathematics your senior year. You also destroyed the curve in stochastic methods, which was remembered for some time by people who were not you." She stared at him. "You were at MIT. "Quietly," he said. She had no memory of him. She said so. "I was easy to miss," he said, without any particular feeling about it. "You were not." She didn't know what to do with that sentence, so she let it sit. "How do you know Theo?" she asked, a small pause. "Business," he said, which told her nothing and something at the same time. "And you?" he asked. "Blythe," she said. "We roomed together freshman year. She's one of the best people I know." He glanced across the room toward Blythe, who was currently laughing at something her future mother-in-law had said, managing to make it look completely genuine. "She seems to navigate this room well," he said. "She's better at it than I am," Camille said, before she could decide whether to say it. He looked back at her. "Why do you say that?" "She fits," Camille said simply. "I'm always doing math in my head about whether I fit." He considered that. "What does the math say tonight?" "Tonight the math is saying approximately." She paused. 63% probability of a clean exit before dessert. "That's specific. I study patterns for a living." He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone who had nothing to say. The quiet of someone who was choosing. "I watched what happened earlier," he said. "By the bar." She went still. "Not closely," he said, "but enough." She looked at the harbor. It was nothing. It didn't look like nothing. "It's an old dynamic," she said. "It doesn't matter anymore." "Okay," he said. He didn't push. She had expected him to push. Most people pushed, in either direction, either offering unsolicited opinions about what she should feel or pivoting quickly to avoid the discomfort of having mentioned it. He just accepted her answer and stood beside her, looking out at the same view. It was strange how much she appreciated that. They stood there for a while. She couldn't have said how long. The party moved around them and they stayed in the orbit of the window, talking in the way she hadn't talked to someone at an event like this in a very long time. Not performing, not networking, not strategically mentioning the right projects and the right names. He asked about her consulting work with the attention of someone who actually wanted to understand it. She told him about the risk modeling framework she'd built for a mid-sized logistics company that had, in the past year, outperformed every projection. He asked 3 follow-up questions that demonstrated he had actually understood the first answer, which was rarer than it should have been. He told her, in a way that was spare and unperformative, about his own work, acquisition, restructuring, the particular discipline of looking at something that most people had written off and understanding what it could become. He said it in the tone of someone describing craft, not trophies. She found herself thinking she could have talked to him for several more hours. Then Donovan walked over. She felt it before she saw it. The slight shift in Augustine's attention, the almost imperceptible change in how he was standing. She turned. Donovan had the easy smile of someone who considered himself the protagonist of every room. He looked at Augustine with the specific assessment of a man who decides other men's worth in under 4 seconds. "Hale," he said, extending his hand. "Donovan Hale. I don't think we've met." "We haven't," Augustine said. He shook his hand. "Didn't offer his name." Donovan waited a beat then. "And you know Camille, I do," Augustine said. Donovan's eyes moved between them with poorly concealed interest. "Small world," he said. Then to Camille, with the warmth of someone performing generosity. "She's brilliant, you know. Always was. Just never quite." Another pause. Another vague gesture, this one somehow encompassing her entirely. "Found her lane." The room didn't go quiet. The party continued behind them, oblivious. But something shifted in the space between the 3 of them, like a pressure change. Augustine looked at Donovan for a long moment. Generated a 22% efficiency increase for Caldwell Logistics in their first year of engagement. The risk framework she built has since been licensed to 2 additional firms in the Northeast. He said it, the way you state a number in a boardroom. No heat, absolute precision. "I'd say she found her lane." Donovan laughed, a little uncertainly. "Right, of course. I just meant, I know what you meant," Augustine said. Something in his voice stopped the sentence. Donovan stood there for a moment, smile still technically present but now operating without any structural support. He looked at Camille. She gave him nothing. "Right," he said again. "Good to catch up." He walked away. He walked away quickly. Camille breathed. "You knew those numbers," she said quietly. "I told you," Augustine said. "I know who you are." She looked at him. "You researched me." "I research most things," he said, without embarrassment. "When I want to understand something, I learn about it, and you wanted to understand me." He was quiet for a moment. Then, yes, she didn't know what to do with that either. She was beginning to notice this was a recurring problem with him. He said things that should have sounded like lines but didn't, because he said them with the same directness he applied to everything else. Like it would be inefficient to be anything other than honest. "Why?" she asked. He looked at her, not at the room, not past her, but at her, with the steadiness she was coming to understand was simply how he existed in space. "Because you walked into this room," he said, "already calculating whether you were allowed to be here, and I've spent enough years watching people with 1/10 of your ability walk into rooms like they own them to find the math interesting." She felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was wound tight. "That's a very strange compliment," she said. "I'm not always good at conventional ones," he said. "What are you good at?" He thought about it. "Accurate ones," he said. They ended up in the quieter bar on the second floor after the engagement toast. Blythe had caught Camille's eye across the room earlier and given her a look that contained approximately 15 years of friendship compressed into a single raised eyebrow. The raised eyebrow that said, "Who is that? And I need information. And also, you look good right now." All at once, Camille had shaken her head almost invisibly. Blythe had smiled in a way that suggested this conversation was not over. The upstairs bar was darker, with leather chairs and bookshelves that were clearly decorative but had been curated with enough taste to not feel offensive. They took a corner table. She ordered bourbon, which she almost never did. He ordered the same. He asked about her family. She told him about her mother in Atlanta, who had raised her and her younger brother alone after their father left when Camille was 7, who had worked as a hospital administrator for 30 years, who had told Camille with complete certainty when she was 11 years old that her brain was going to take her somewhere extraordinary, and that she should never let anyone make her doubt it. "Did anyone," he asked, "make me doubt it?" She turned her glass slowly. Plenty of people. Some of them were obvious about it. Some of them were very, very good at making it look like support. He understood what she meant. She could tell from the way he didn't ask her to elaborate. "Your father," she said, because the conversation had that quality now where she could ask things. "Still in the picture?" "He died when I was 19, Augustin said. He was a difficult man. In what way? In the way of a man who believed strength was the only language, he said. Everything else was weakness. Feelings, softness, attachment. He had a talent for making the people around him feel like they were failing a test they hadn't known they were taking." She recognized that description from a different direction. "Did you pass the test?" "No," he said. "I stopped taking it," which he considered the same thing. A pause. "It took me longer than it should have to understand that the test was designed to fail." She nodded. "Not with performance, just with understanding." They talked for 2 hours. She didn't track the time. She noticed afterward that she hadn't checked her phone once, which was unusual for her at events. Usually she was watching the clock, building toward the exit, running the departure math. Instead, she had been just present, talking. Laughing, actually, at something he said about a restructuring deal that had gone spectacularly sideways in ways that were now, in retrospect, somewhat instructive. He had a dry, precise way of finding humor in things that she responded to immediately, like a frequency she already knew how to receive. At some point he said, very simply, "I'd like to see you again." She looked at him. He met her eyes without flinching. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Someone easier to categorize," she said. "Is that good or bad?" She thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet," she said. "I think it's interesting. I'll take interesting," he said. She gave him her number. She told herself, walking down the stairs and finding Blythe for a quick, fierce hug before leaving, that she wasn't going to think too much about it, that she had learned the cost of thinking too much about certain things, that she was going to go home and sleep and see what the morning looked like. She thought about it the whole cab ride home. He called the next afternoon. Not a text, called, which she hadn't expected, and which she found she respected immediately. They had dinner that Thursday. He had made a reservation at a restaurant in the South End that she knew had a 6-week wait, and she decided not to ask how he'd managed it, because she was beginning to understand that Augustin Varro managed things in ways that were quiet and complete, and not particularly interesting to him to explain. The dinner was 3 hours. They closed the restaurant down without noticing. He walked her to the corner where her cab was waiting, and she stood on the sidewalk in the October cold, and he looked at her in the lamplight and said, "You have no idea how you look right now." She had been on dates where men said things like that, and it had felt like a line, deployed, aimed, intended to produce an effect. This didn't feel like that. This felt like a man making an observation he couldn't keep to himself. "Tell me," she said, because she wanted to hear it, because she was tired of not wanting things. Like someone who stopped apologizing for taking up space, he said, "It's the best thing I've seen in a long time." She stood there in the cold and let that land. Didn't deflect, didn't make a joke, didn't perform modesty. Just let someone say a true thing about her and received it. "Thank you," she said. He nodded like it was simple. Because for him, it was. It was 6 weeks later at a board dinner Augustine had asked her to attend, something she had been uncertain about and had said yes to anyway, that she saw Donovan again. She had known it was a possibility. Boston was that kind of city. The circles overlapped at the edges the way they always did. She had prepared for it in the abstract sense of knowing it was coming and deciding it didn't matter, and she discovered, standing next to Augustine when Donovan walked across the room toward them, that she had been right. It didn't matter. The thing she had spent 2 years carrying had lost most of its weight. Donovan's expression when he saw them together was something she stored in a quiet part of her mind for later. "Camille," he said. He smiled. The smile had something careful in it now. "You look." He searched for the right word. For once, he seemed uncertain which one to choose. "Good," Augustine said calmly. "Just the one word, just the fact of it." Donovan looked at him, then back at her. Something flickered in his eyes that she recognized as recalibration. The moment when a person updates their assessment of a situation and realizes they had been working with the wrong numbers. "Yes," Donovan said, finally. "You do." She smiled at him, and the smile was genuine, which surprised her, not because she felt warmth for him, but because she felt amped freedom, and that was its own kind of freedom. She had expected anger or residual hurt, or the specific exhaustion of having to manage your own feelings in front of someone who caused them. Instead, there was just air, clear and cold and easy. "Good to see you, Donovan," she said, and meant it the way you mean things that are simply done. He made his excuses and moved away. Augustine watched him go, then looked at her. "You okay?" "Yes," she said. And that was true too. He took her hand, not a grand gesture, just a hand, and they walked toward the dinner. Later, much later, in the particular quiet of very late at night, when they were sitting in her apartment with the city below the windows, and the lamps low, and 2 glasses of wine mostly finished between them, she told him about the night of the gala. Not the performance version of the story, not the cleaned-up, retrospectively dignified version, the real one. What it had actually felt like to hear Donovan's voice and feel her whole nervous system contract into something small. What it had felt like to stand at that window alone and try to remember who she was. Augustine listened without interrupting. He had a way of listening that made it feel like the whole room had narrowed to just the conversation. Like nothing else was competing for his attention. Because for him, nothing was. "You asked me at the gala," she said, "what the math said about whether I fit. I remember. The real answer," she said, "was that I had been running that calculation for so long it had started to feel like a fact instead of a question." He was quiet for a moment. Then, and now, she looked at the city, at the lights, at the specific, uncountable brightness of a place that held this many lives at once. "Now," she said, "I've stopped running it." He looked at her, the way he always looked at her, with that quality of attention that never felt like assessment, that felt instead like recognition. Like someone seeing a thing clearly and being glad it exists. "Good," he said. Outside, the city moved. Inside, the lamps burned low and warm, and Camille Okafor sat in her own apartment in her own life, taking up exactly as much space as she wanted, and did not calculate anything at all.